Truly listening to others is difficult, and we need to watch out for some roadblocks in order to do it effectively. Hello, friend. My name's Zach, and I love to connect with others. But sometimes I stop hearing them, and it sounds more like blah, blah, blah in the background, and it does not make someone feel loved and connected. See, if you miss out on listening to someone, that's what you're really missing out on. A chance for them to feel loved, cared for, connected, and maybe even giving them space to hear the Holy Spirit work in their life. So we got to watch out for 6 roadblocks. All right, let's dive in. Number 1 is margin. When we lack margin, we stop listening. In fact, when I'm rushing from one thing to another thing and someone's trying to talk to me, all I'm thinking of is shut up, I need to go. Right? And we're in this hurried state. And we give off all the body language we're in a hurried state, and can make someone feel really terrible. If someone starts to reveal their heart to you and you're in a moment of a lack of margin, let them know. Hey, I want to listen. Can we make another appointment to talk about this or another time and place? Because I have to go to this thing. See, sometimes we want to be kind, and kindness is withholding. Right? We want to be there for them in that moment. So we just try to listen. If you do not have the margin, love would say to tell them you don't have the margin. And make the time at another point. Number 2, distractions. I am ADD, supercharged squirrel running around. And I get super distracted.
My master made me this collar. He is a good and smart master, and he made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
It takes a lot of energy for me to focus on someone, because when we're focused on them, we're actually listening. When our eyes are wandering off like this, we've stopped listening. We're partially listening. In fact, anyone that tells you that they're really good at multitasking, that is false. Scientifically false. In fact, someone that appears to be good at multitasking just switches back and forth between tasks really fast. So it makes it appear as if they can do 2 things at once, but they're not. You can't focus on this thing over here and listen to you over here. In fact, if you're listening to this video while you're doing something else, you're partially hearing me. I'm not mad about it, but it's just the facts. So what helps me to not get distracted by things all around me is to focus on someone's nose, their mouth, and their eyes, this part of their face. If I start to wander my gaze in any way, shape, or form, I have to remind myself, look at their nose. So if we meet in person and you feel like I'm staring at your nose and eyes, I am. I'm not judging it. I'm trying to fully hear you. All right, number 3, assumptions can get in the way of listening to others. We all form assumptions, right? This is human nature. It's something we do. But we need to be aware that we're forming those assumptions. When you're listening to someone and you're assuming where they're going, you kind of stop listening. Or maybe you've assumed they need an answer from you and you're ready to give it. You know what they say about assuming? Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you here. But when we assume, it usually leads to a dangerous place. Now, you don't need to stop assuming, but what you do need to do is test those assumptions through questions. So if you've come up with an assumption, don't go, stop it, nah, 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 nah. No, that's just as distracting to you and not hearing them. But maybe ask a question to see if your assumption is accurate. You know, I've done this sometimes just so I can be a better listener, not because I actually think that my assumption's wrong, and I have been totally off the mark. I thought they wanted my advice when they really didn't. Or a time where I didn't think they wanted advice, but I asked and they really did in that moment. Our assumptions can lead us anywhere and everywhere. And the cool thing is when you're testing your assumption, it also makes you an active listener, which it makes you engage more with the person. So it's got a win-win for you. All right, number 4, the wrong listening posture. I've fallen into this trap more than I'd like to admit. There's two ways that are improper listening if you want someone to feel heard. The first one is listening to hijack. And this is you're just waiting for them to breathe so that you can hijack the conversation in a different direction. So it's not even going to be about what they're talking about. They're going to be sharing their heart about their day and their struggle they're having, and you're going to be like, hey, you know what I did this weekend? That's hijack. You're obviously not listening. You're just waiting for the breath. Now, the next one is a little more not as obvious, but it's the same impact of not really hearing someone, and that's listening to interrupt. And this is the same thing. You're waiting for them to finish talking, to interrupt them, but you're going to stay on the same conversation. But what they said just sparked your interest. This is really hard for me because sometimes I have really wise things to say that someone needs to hear, right? Or it just spurred on my thinking and something in my own life. And it can be hard to lay those things aside. But to truly listen, we need to. And what helps is to have the listening posture of listening to understand. And how you can do this is when someone's speaking, you just mirror back to them what they're saying and ask them, is that right? And this does a few different purposes. One is it makes sure you really did hear them, because we're not as clear as we think we are in communicating. Because like sometimes I've recorded these videos and then afterwards I totally missed a story or a point and it didn't fully make sense. And I was like, dang it, I felt like I was in the flow in that moment, right? The same thing happens in conversations where someone's explaining something to you and maybe it's as clear as mud. Or maybe it's very clear and you ask them if it's right and it's like, no, that's not what I was trying to say. Intention and impact rarely match. But the other thing it does is when we mirror back and we're listening to understand, it makes the person calm down. I was just reading this morning that neuroscience has kind of looked at someone's brain, that when you mirror back to someone what they just said, you literally calm their brain down. So if they're in fight, flight, or freeze, it relieves that for that person. That's why have you ever been around the person where you're sharing your heart and you leave and you're like, I can breathe again? It's because they did that for you. For all of you arguers out there or disagreeers, a little caveat you need to really know. Listening to understand does not mean listening to agree. And that might help you. Because some of you, like myself, might be so worried about someone getting something right or correct that you're like, well, I can't mirror that back because it's wrong. You're not agreeing. You're just making sure you're understanding what they're saying. And this is really important when someone's in a spun up state. Like they say, I've met with a father, for example, and he's like, I just feel like I'm a terrible dad. And it can be tempting to rescue or do something else, but instead mirroring back. So what I hear you saying is you just feel like you're dropping the ball as a dad. Right? That's not me saying that I agree with that. That's identifying with the feeling. Number 5, lacking a real desire to listen. Look, if you really don't want to listen to someone, no tips, tricks, or anything's really going to help. The only thing I would say to this is, if you lack a real desire to listen to someone, and there's someone close to you, maybe that's something you can bring towards God for a heart change. And if it's someone you're not close to and you don't have a real desire to listen to them, then don't pretend. Let them down gently. But nothing can trump the actual desire to listen. In fact, a lot of times, like I've said, I'm really bad with names. But you know, when I had a real desire to remember my bride's name before we were dating, I remembered it. There was not a point that I was going to forget that name. I was thinking about her all the time, right? Because desire was there. And I think lots of times I've said I'm bad with names. I really just didn't have a desire to learn that person's name, if I'm honest. And I really look at it. I think we self-deceive in this one. Be honest with yourself. Bring it before the Lord. Number 6, anxiety. When we get internally spun up, we can't even see the other person, let alone hear them. And sometimes people share things that make us anxious. In fact, when we're anxious, we get blind to others and blind to God, and even blind to ourselves. It's like brain disconnects from the body, and we get this lizard brain. Lizards are not very intelligent. That's why it's called that. Our IQ literally drops in that moment when we're anxious. How do we get out of this? We notice, hey, what they're sharing is making me anxious. We name, not to them, like you don't tell them, you're giving me a bunch of anxiety. That doesn't work. But you name just to yourself, what about that is making me anxious? And a lot of times that will diffuse the anxiety enough to where you can really hear them. At the end of the day, to really hear someone, it comes out of a great union with God. See, the vertical, our relationship with God, and the horizontal, our relationship with the others, are interconnected. And the more we are in lockstep with God and He changes our desire to actually love people well and hear them, it's the only way we can truly hear someone, is empowered by God. And so if you want to walk in lockstep with God so that you can hear others and love them well, watch this video right here. I know it'll really help you.